So again, I'd like to welcome you and acknowledge that we are indeed on Treaty 6 territory, most of us. And what does that mean? Treaty 6 was a treaty that was requested by the Indigenous peoples at the time in the late 1800s. And they had made an agreement with the Governor General of Canada on supposedly the sharing of land. And I think there was a misunderstanding. And the government, in its contractual obligations, didn't really live up to those conditions, and there's been a bit of a mess ever since. We're trying to resolve that in whatever way we can. The people of conscience in Canada are working hard to make the conditions better for everybody. So we are the beneficiaries, though, of that treaty, and we're all on Treaty 6 land. I'd just like to acknowledge that. Now, I think I also have the job of introducing our speaker today. And I like to share these responsibilities a little bit, but I think they dropped on me for some reason. So, and Lewis has been a longtime friend, and he's as a member of the Edmonton Interfaith Center, and we certainly welcome him on our board. He's a founding member of the Fort Edmonton Management Company, a board member of Theatre Network, a board member of the North Saskatchewan River Valley Conservation Society, and a board member past of the Council of the Parliament of the World's Religions in Chicago. Lewis has received a medal from the Queen for public service, and he's got a Centennial Award from the province of Alberta, Distinguished Alumni Award from Grant MacEwan University, an honorary Doctor of Letters degree from St. Stephen's College. And I'm going to admit somebody else here. And he's a Woodland Cree from the Sucker Creek Cree First Nation in Northern Alberta, and his consulting company, Cardinal Strategic Communications, specializing in Indigenous education, governance, and communications. And currently, Lewis is a project manager for Kichiaski, a Sacred Earth in the city of Edmonton, and that's what he's going to be speaking about today. But I'd like to mention a couple of personal contacts that I've had with Lewis. And one was I went to the launch of an art exhibit that's going to be located in Jasper Avenue, downtown Edmonton, going to be opening in March. And it was featuring Douglas Cardinal's work as an architect. And to my surprise and delight, Lewis Cardinal was the person that introduced him and introduced the project. So I was very pleased about that. And just recently, I was on a Zoom call, one-to-one Zoom call with a lady in Chicago who is in interfaith work. And when she discovered I was from Edmonton, she said, "Do you know Lewis Cardinal?" And I said, "Certainly." And she said, "Say hi to him for me because he's such a delightful man." So on that note, I'd like to ask Lewis Cardinal to take it away and tell us about Kichiaski.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Guy. I'm very honored to be once again sitting on the board of the Edmonton Interfaith Network Society for Education and Action, and it's a real treat for me to work with such wonderful people, like-minded, big-hearted, generous. The list goes on and on. So, you know, there's a saying that you can be measured by the company that you keep. So I guess I must be a pretty good guy. And so I'm going to do a PowerPoint presentation. I know that time's limited, so please eat during this presentation if you like. And hopefully my presentation won't interfere with your lunch. So give me a second here. Let me get this all set up. Great. Well, here we are. Creating and reclaiming Indigenous space in an urban center. That's been a large part of my work for a number of years here in Edmonton. I grew up here in Edmonton. I came here first in 1968 and then lived permanently from 1971 onward. So that's going way back. And I like to say 1971 BC. I mean, before computers. And And so that's how old I am. Nonetheless, growing up here, my brother Lauren and I, we grew up downtown, and we didn't really see we didn't see any actually Indigenous reflectivity in the city that really identified who we are. And so that's always something that has been a part of my heart, the work that I've been doing, especially living here in Edmonton. And I love this city because the city has great connection to my family's history, both on my Métis side and on my Cree side. My Métis ancestors worked in Fort Edmonton, and as a matter of fact, in the forts from Winnipeg all the way up to Edmonton. And so it has a very special place in my heart. And of course, my Woodland Cree relatives from the north controlled the trading routes going up into the Peace Country and that area. And Mustos and Canusio were the makers of Treaty Number 8, which until recently was the largest treaty made between Indigenous people and the Crown in North America for sure, and maybe even around the world. And the land base, I was just told this recently, was as large as France is. So that's the amount of land that we signed into treaty in 1899, and then the adhesions going into 1906. Anyhow, the urban center, as you all know, is Edmonton has about 82,000 Indigenous people inside of its boundaries, and within an hour's driving distance, that goes up to about 120, 125,000 Indigenous people who utilize Edmonton on a daily basis. And so now, over the years, and what I'm going to present is going back to about 2004, when we really started to push an urban Indigenous relationship with the city of Edmonton. And here are some of the results that have come from that. So beginning at the beginning, in 2004, the Edmonton Urban Aboriginal Affairs Committee, I was chairing the committee at the time, and we had asked them very basic questions about what can we do as an affairs committee within the city to start to do something that's creating a relationship between the Indigenous people here in the city and the city itself. So we started to do that work with the consent and involvement of our Indigenous leaderships, both through political leadership, as well as community leadership, as well as organizational leadership. So we incorporated all of these folks into a discussion and dialogue about where should we go in the city to strengthen our relationships. So in 2005, we started something called the Edmonton Declaration, and it was called Strengthening Relationships with Urban Indigenous Peoples and the City of Edmonton. And so that was the intent in which Edmonton declared that it wanted to move forward in building positive relationships with Indigenous people, as well as acknowledging and bringing forward Indigenous contributions to the city. And then from mid 2005 until 2006, we went throughout the communities here, and we had numerous dialogues in church basements, in organizational offices, boardrooms, a number of places. And from that, in 2006, we created a report called Your City, Your Voice report, which came out with 22 recommendations in how to include Indigenous people within the city in terms of that reflectivity I was talking about, as well as projects and initiatives that we can move forward. So then in 2006, the Edmonton Urban Aboriginal Accord Relationship Agreement was created. And this agreement that set out a new relationship in terms of how we can work together. So this was built by the Indigenous voices of our people. And then in 2007, we created the Indigenous Relations Office, which was the first office of its kind in Canada that works directly as a conduit between the Indigenous community and the City of Edmonton administration and leadership. As well, the Edmonton Urban Aboriginal Accord also became a new benchmark, as was declared by the Canadian Association of Municipalities, that pointed to the Accord, the Edmonton Accord, as being a new benchmark of urban Indigenous relations. And then in 2010, we presented a concept called Spirit of Edmonton, and in it were 8 projects that we saw, two of which have come to fruition. And also in 2018, we had an Indigenous art park, which everyone knows, that's River Lot 11. And then in 2021, the Indigenous Peoples Experience opened. And I don't know if you had a chance to see that. I suggest that you do. It's wonderful. And then in 2022, the Kichiaski Sacred Earth Project is officially scheduled to open in 2023. So in 2022, we did a ground blessing ceremony to kick everything off. So construction has begun. So Your City, Your Voice in 2006 collected concerns, visions, ideas that the Indigenous community would like to see happen in the city, and issues and concerns to be addressed. And you can access this report through the Edmonton.ca website. And here's the declaration that I was talking about in 2005, celebrating past Aboriginal contributions, recognize that past injustices have impacted the Aboriginal society, acknowledging the unique challenges facing Aboriginal people, valuing Aboriginal people contributions to today, appreciating the legitimacy of Aboriginal autonomy and Aboriginal people in our city's future. So this really was the starting gun for us to really put our shoulders to the wheel and start to move things forward. And from that, the community said that we needed to have a relationship agreement based on a set of principles, because we do have a lot of targeted employment goals and poverty goals and those sorts of things. But what the elders felt was necessary was to establish a set of principles and how the relationship would work and how this relationship agreement will pull together the Indigenous community. So we had it into 4 parts, and that was relationships, agreement, celebrations, and renewal. This can also be accessed on the City of Edmonton website as well. And it was important for us to have those sets of principles at the core of our relationship building. And then that would lead us as an Indigenous community in the City of Edmonton forward. And that would be the principles that lead our relationship in building projects, initiatives, and targeted goals.
Excuse me a moment,
Yep.
please. Was your intention to
Yep.
have the PowerPoint on right now? Because we don't see
Yes.
it.
You don't see it?
No.
See? Okay, let me try this one. Can you see it now?
Not yet, no.
This is strange.
Share screen.
Okay, I am so sorry, everyone. Let me try it again.
I'm glad Karen
thought I
alerted
had
me.
it. Thank you, everyone. I
You got it.
appreciate that. Let me try this. Can you see this now?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, just really quickly, here's a list of the dates that I was going on about. And here's the Your City, Your Voice. This is what it looks like with the appendices. And what we did with the appendices, is that we recorded all of our meetings, and we took copious amounts of notes. And each of the meetings notes are in these appendices as well. And here's the declaration, strengthening relationships in 2005. That's what got us. It was August 30th, 2005, actually, when it was declared. And then here's the Urban Aboriginal Accord Agreement. This is the benchmark I was referring to. And these 2 documents have been foundational documents as we've created the Indigenous framework for the City of Edmonton just recently. And so the 8 projects that in the Spirit of Edmonton document that we created in 2010 were 8 projects. And we also did in 2004 a Rossdale Flats oral histories project, and that was an important study. As the city was doing a traditional land use study of Rossdale Flats, they failed to include an oral histories project. This is where we brought in the Indigenous historians and knowledge keepers that had stories and relevant information about Rossdale Flats. And Rossdale Flats, as we all know, is the birthplace of Edmonton. So it's a significant location for us all. And, you know, and we all know that it's an ancient gathering place that goes back to about at least 11,000 years ago or so. And so it's quite old, and there's a lot of materials and textile things that they found out there that has supported that date. But the 8 projects in the spirit of Edmonton were the Sacred Fire at Shaw Conference Center, the Louise Omperville Fountain Monument, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but the Indigenous Art Gallery Sun and Moon Visionaries, which unfortunately is no longer in existence. The natural, however, there is a new art gallery that will be opening soon, that has opened and will be opening up a lot bigger soon. Anyway, I'll talk about that in a moment. Natural and Indigenous Histories Trail, the Umperville and Rowan Bridge honorary naming, and the Kichiaski Sacred Earth or Sacred Land Ceremonial Grounds, the Indigenous Center for Art and Knowledge, and of course the River Lot 11. So the Sacred Fire at the Shaw Conference Center we felt was important, since the Shaw Conference Center is utilized quite frequently by Indigenous organizations in local, regional, provincial, and national and international Indigenous gatherings. And so what we proposed is that a sacred fire be permanently installed. So when Indigenous people meet, or other people if they choose to use it, we can light a sacred fire that would burn during their conferences. And that's a tradition that Indigenous people follow in many places around the world. So we wanted to have that as a place for Indigenous people to utilize it when they come here to Edmonton to have their conferences. And of course, Louise Omperville, we wanted, and we still, this is still an idea that's floating around, is to have a fountain in her honor. Louise Omperville was married to Fort Factor John Rowand, and she was quite substantial. Both him and her really are the ones who really built Edmonton into becoming an economic center and a people center and a gathering center. So we wanted to honor Louise for her leadership. She did a tremendous amount of work, and Louise, she oversaw the York building of boats, York boat building, as well as she ran the pemmican trade out of Fort Edmonton, which was critical for survival of the fort at the time. And she had like 7 children with John Rowland. And so she was a very powerful lady. And we wanted to celebrate not only her and her contributions, but also the contribution of Indigenous women in Edmonton as their contribution to the formation of the city of Edmonton. The Indigenous Art Gallery, which was called Sun and Moons, it was located at the Ross School, the old Ross School building there, but it's since closed. However, there's a new art gallery that's owned, that's so wholly owned by an Indigenous couple, and it is called Whiskey Jack Art House. They opened this last summer, late spring, on 96th Street and 111th Avenue. They have their art gallery set up there. But what we're doing now is we'll be moving them over to the newly refurbished and renovated Pendennis building, which is on Jasper Avenue between 96th Street and 97th Street. So we'll be opening that next year. And the Indigenous, the Histories Trail, of course, is still a good idea. That hasn't taken full fruition, but you'll see, if you look at the trail itself, there's different things that have Indigenous connection to it along the trail itself. And the Indigenous Center for Art and Knowledge is something that we're still talking about with Douglas Cardinal, the architect, as well as other architects from the United States. And so this is an idea we want to move forward. And you look at this, of course, it's a quintessential Douglas Cardinal design. And it's chock full of all kinds of symbols and various things within it. So this was quite a large space that can house an art gallery, a museum. It's a place where Indigenous people can gather for meetings and different things like that, and also a place to be shared with Edmontonians, and we can have that open for their participation. Of course, I don't know if some of you have seen the Indigenous Art Park and River Lot 11. Here are some of the pictures of that, of some of the installations at the site. And that's at where the old Queen Mary swimming pool used to be. And so that's open, and it's frequently visited. It's one of those gems that are kind of hidden in the river valley. So it's a wonderful place to come upon should you be walking or traversing some of the trails in the riverside down in the Rossdale Flats area and across the river. And of course, the Indigenous Peoples Experience at Fort Edmonton opened this June. And this is an overlay of what the site looks like. So this is in the southwest quadrant of Fort Edmonton. You can see the fort to the left, and you can see the Indoor Interpretive Center. And this is the covered venue. And I'll show you an overlay of the inside of that in a second. But we have a performance arbor there. We have a food arbor. We have, we're going to be setting up a Métis cabin area, but more than one cabin, of course. We have a teepee village that's also set up there, and they have an Indigenous plant trail that people can walk through. So it's more than just the presentation stuff within the center itself, but it's open to be explored all over the area. And there's more programming that will be coming back to that soon. So, here's a terrible grainy picture of the inside, so we'll just move right along. This here is the, let's see. Yeah, so this is the interior. And I don't know how many people have gone through this yet, but it's really chock full of a tremendous amount of information from different Indigenous nations. And of course, we have the Métis cabin, which is in the interior. And also it's called Forest of People, but that's Métis history, Métis settlers, which is a very important part of the formation of Edmonton and the region. And then we talk about the changing world, the post-contact, we talk about the treaties, we talk about some of the leadership that's there. And so it's dense with a lot of information. You probably have to come through a couple times at least to get everything in. And then the final area, it says scene 11, that's the gathering place. That is where we have some video and audio, storytelling, and the lot. And in the back of the house, we have what is called the Learning Center. So there's 3 large classrooms or meeting spaces that can be booked and utilized. And I was going through it this weekend again, and Everett Poor, who is the person overseeing all of the programming and everything there, he was telling me that a number of organizations and corporations have been booking the space for their retreats and their meetings and things like that. So, and they're getting a lot out of it by spending the time within this. We started this back in, 2009. When the Fort Edmonton Management Company was about to be put together, Mayor Mandel was telling me that they were concerned about the generation of interest and revenue from Fort Edmonton not meeting the needs that they wanted. And so he asked me, he goes, "So what do you think the problem is with Fort Edmonton?" And I said, well, to me, it's quite clear that, you're only telling half the story of Edmonton, and the other half is the Indigenous people and the Indigenous people's history, because history doesn't start for us in 1795. It starts far longer than that. And I said, you start out, and as you know, when you'll take a train from where you get your tickets at the west end, at the east end of Fort Edmonton Park, and then it brings you down to, the train brings you down to Fort Edmonton, and then you begin your journey in time with the fort. But now you have the choice of going to the Indigenous People Center to begin your journey through Fort Edmonton with Indigenous knowledge and stories and history and wonderful things like that. And this building is scheduled to be open year-round. And in talking with Everett Poor, he was saying that they'll close it down during the coldest part of the year, which would be the middle of January and February, but then they'll open it back up for continued service. And so the space is being visited, and they just won a THEA award for the being an eco-musée or a museum award from the yeah, I can't remember what THEA stands for, but anyway, so that was their award that they just received. Okay, just a second. And then, okay, here's another terrible picture of the Métis cabin, and the forest of people is to the right. And here's the nice interior shot of the Métis cabin. Again, there's a tremendous amount of information there, but also a lot of the artifacts that are on display and accessible are replicas of originals, of course. And it really gives you a sense of what the time was like for the Métis. And so this is a wonderful space to spend some time in. And that final space I was talking about is the gathering room. So you can see a lot of screens in the background and some benches, and they have videos going on a regular basis, a number of different kinds of videos. And again, the space can be rented out for various receptions and that. And so the project that we're engaged in now, that I've been working on, is Kichiaski Sacred Land. And this project started back in 2006. I was when I was working at the University of Alberta, I used to be able to access the old Fox Farms and the back part of their pasture for sweat lodges that we would host every now and again. In 2006, a council of elders came to me from Native Counseling Services of Alberta, who at the time was hosting Healing Our Spirits Worldwide. And Healing Our Spirits Worldwide is an international Indigenous conference that is about healing, regeneration of culture, utilizing culture and knowledge within the healing traditions. And so they had a week-long conference, and they asked me if I can find a location in the city where they can have access to land for their ceremonies, like sweat lodges and healing lodges and that sort of thing. So myself, along with Elder Will Campbell, presented to the city the concept of ceremonial grounds in an urban center. And in 2008, the city, oh, and I have to say that the organization we were with was called, we created the Indigenous Elders Circle Society for to move this proposal forward through the city. And in 2008, the city set aside some funds to do a feasibility study, to do some consultation. And then in 2010, we gathered 120 Indigenous elders from across all of Alberta, not just northern Alberta, but across Alberta to guide us and to provide direction on this concept. Because at the time there was an issue and a concern by Indigenous elders and some community members that ceremonies should not be held in the center, in the city, and that was a pretty big and contentious question at the time. But we thought it'd be best if we put this question before these elders. And for 3 days, the elders met, and they came away with a consensus, and they said, yes, we need to have ceremonies accessible in the city of Edmonton. And not all ceremonies, but the basic ceremonies, the other high ceremonies like sundances and vision quests and those sort of things need to be held outside of the city. And there are First Nations and other locations where these sorts of ceremonies can be done. And so so they said, yes, we have to do that, because we know that in the future, most Indigenous people will be living in urban centers. And so and they said that if you do build this, find a location that is clean. And what they meant by that is that it's in a natural environment. And of course, Whitemud Park is significant in that area. It's really quite a lovely space. And when you're on Kichiaski, where the old Fox Farms used to be, you really do feel like you're out in the country, with the exception of a bit of a drone from the traffic that goes by. But really, more than that, you can swear that you're outside in the country. So this project then became a relationship project between the City of Edmonton and now the Indigenous Knowledge and Wisdom Center. However, prior to that, Native Counseling Services Alberta had worked on it for a number of years, and they went under reorganization, and then they asked the Indigenous Knowledge and Wisdom Center if they take on the project, and the IKWC agreed in 2019, and then in the summer of 2020, they inquired as to if I'd be willing to take on the project and become its project manager and make it happen. So we're making it happen. But the core of this relationship, we always have to remind ourselves, is about peace, friendship, and respect. And peace, friendship, and respect are the foundational parts of our treaty making process in Canada. And that we're always working in that perspective of working in peace and friendship and respecting each other as well. So, so Kichiaski then will be not only a place for ceremonies, but also a place for cultural activities that support the community and other organizations and events. So it's a place where the diversity of our Indigenous cultures can come and practice their ceremonies and their traditions of the transfer of knowledge. So it becomes also an educational component to it. Because the elders said that it's time that we start to share our knowledge and our wisdom and our history with non-Indigenous people. So Kichiaski isn't just for the city, for the Indigenous people in the city of Edmonton. It's open to Edmontonians as well. So we're developing some programming to meet that. And through this whole project, we've been guided by the Kichiaski Sacred Land Elders Council, which is an 8-member council. And they've been working on this for almost 8 years. And they're the same council that we started with, and they're wonderful to work with. So just so you know where it is, now you get a visual. You see Fort Edmonton on the top left corner of the picture, White Mud Drive, and then Fox Drive. And that shaded light green area is where the Kichiaski location is going to be. And so what was important to the elders at the time is that Kichiaski be accessible to Indigenous youth and families. And there's 2 ETF bus stops just at the entrance of Fox Drive. So a person can take a bus down there on the weekends when we'll have ceremonies or events or activities that they can participate in. And it's also fairly close to the heart of the city, which is which makes it all that much more special. And as I was saying, it's a place where Edmontonians can learn about our traditions and history, and also to reestablish relationship and connection and ceremony to the land. And having that connection to the land is a critical part of identity formation, the grounding of your identity. And of course, this would be led by respected Indigenous elders and knowledge keepers, and also a space for land-based education. And here at IKWC, they're developing land-based education curriculum, and they've been piloting various programs. We had a few programs there this summer. So activities have been taking place on Kichiaski over the last year, just so that we can test run various aspects, so that would help us then to organize and develop our processes and procedures. And also special gatherings. For example, this summer we had the North Saskatchewan River Water Walkers, and there was about 80 folks who showed up to have a ceremony, talking circle, and some food, and also to raise the spirits of the water walkers as they made their way to the mouth of the North Saskatchewan River. And this will be the first urban Indigenous cultural and ceremonial grounds in all of Canada. And the elders had hoped that it will also inspire other cities to do the same. As a matter of fact, tomorrow I'll be having a conference call with the City of Winnipeg Indigenous Relations Office to see how they can strategize to move forward the very same idea, to create Indigenous space in Winnipeg for ceremonies and cultural activities. Edmonton leads the way again. And then, so this is the site overview. So it's a 3-phase overview. And right now we're working on phase 1. And that's the lighted area that you see there. And in phase 1, we have a lane expansion, because right now the lane that goes into the old Fox Farm site is really quite narrow and only fits 1 vehicle on it. So we want to widen it a bit more, so traffic is easier to move through. And then we have a 50 vehicle parking lot that's there with a parking space for two buses. We have an amphitheater, a pavilion, so there'll be 2 buildings built down there. We'll have a teepee circle, a sweat lodge area, walkways and landscaping. So that's phase 1. Phase 2 is developing a medicine garden with walkways and things. And the medicine garden will be utilized for teaching opportunities, but also harvesting of traditional medicines that we can then distribute to the cultural and ceremonial practitioners here in Edmonton. And phase 3 at the very bottom of this picture is what we call flexible space, because within our ceremonies, in many different nations, they have different ceremonial structures that they use for their events. So we wanted to make sure that we had space at the site where different types of structures, and they're not permanent structures by any means. None of these structures that are down there, with the exception of the 2 buildings, are permanent structures. Yeah, okay, so here's a little bit better of a closer up of phase 1. And you can see the parking lot, the laneway, the 2 buildings that are there, and the teepee area. We can set up about 12 different teepees at one setting easily. We can even do as much as 18 if we really needed to. And the center of that is a fire pit, or what we call a feast fire pit. And then below that, the teepee circle are where our sweat lodge locations will be. And so the sweat lodges are very important for our nations in terms of healing and spiritual growth and those sorts of things. And it's a great place where traditional knowledge and sacred knowledge can be transferred to other generations. So this is phase 1. This is what we're working on now. Construction began on this formally about 3 weeks ago. And so they've staked out the areas, they've begun putting in pilings and various things like that. So this is the site this fall, early fall. And the top left picture that's the only structure that's left from the old Fox Farm building. It's a pump house. We call it a pump house, but there's a electrical outlet in there to access electricity. And there was a water pump in there that we used to access water. And the picture at the bottom left is the far end, the south end of the Kichiaski site. So you get a kind of an idea of the scope of the size of the space that we're working with. And the large picture is looking north from the main Kichiaski site, where the 2 buildings will be built. And you can see the Fort Edmonton Exchange. So if you go to Fort Edmonton and you take the north turnoff, then right across from that on the south side is where Kichiaski is. And now there's signage up that is announcing the construction of Kichiaski Sacred Land. And so this is an artist's rendering of what it would look like. This is a sweat lodge, and the teepees in the background just kind of give you a scope of what it would potentially look like. And in the back, you can see the Kichiaski Pavilion. Here's a better picture of it, more of a 3D version of it. So in the foreground is the Kichiaski Pavilion with change rooms, washrooms, and the gathering room. The gathering room is a space where people can have classrooms. You can use it as a classroom, a meeting space, a feast area after sweat lodges, that sort of thing. And the storage building and the amphitheater building on the top part of this picture is where we're going to keep our equipment. And the amphitheater is going to be built in as an outdoor classroom or a place where we can begin some programming. And here's a better picture of that. So that's the amphitheater. And we can use it as a place to begin like nature walks and medicine walks, as we call it. It can be a performance area as well, and also a lecture area. So it can be used in many different fashions. And here's more of the size of the pavilion. So it's not a really huge building. Neither of them are, and we don't and we didn't really want to have huge buildings down there. We thought this would be adequate for our use. And here's an architectural rendering of it. You can see where we're going to store our teepee poles, our electric vehicles that we will move around the area with, fire storage area, and a place where we can keep all of our materials for our activities. And then, of course, here's a rendering of the Kichiaski Pavilion, the change rooms and the washrooms, and also the gathering room space. Just gives you a better scope of what that looks like. And of course, we will have solar panels on both buildings. We want to utilize Mother Nature's natural sunlight to energize and keep the place running. And so this September, we had a ground blessing ceremony on September 22nd. And we had the then mayor, Don Iveson, in with us. And we had a very small ground blessing ceremony. And it's really not so much as blessing the ground, but really letting Mother Earth know and asking permission for us to move forward with this project and to help guide us. And so instead of having a groundbreaking ceremony, we thought we'd have a ground blessing ceremony. And so we made offerings to Mother Earth. We stood in circle. In the bottom left picture, you can see us sitting in a circle. Of course, we were following COVID regulations, and we wanted to make sure that, we didn't, because there are a lot of people who wanted to come, but we could only do 10 that can sit in the circle. But we had to do it on the day of the equinox. And in the teepee behind us, we started out with a pipe ceremony. And the interesting thing is when we started with the pipe ceremony, as we went in, it was an overcast day, a little bit of rain, a drizzle, and cloudy and foggy. And so when we were done, the sun started to come out, the clouds started to break. And so by the time we got to the talking circle portion of it, it was fully sunny, as you can see there now. So the elder was saying, it looks like, we've got her blessings to move forward. So that was a very, very positive thing. And then we are projecting to have an official opening ceremony in the winter equinox of 2023. The construction may be done a bit earlier, may be done a bit later, but nonetheless, it's around the same time in 2023. And we want to, at that time, and depending on the COVID situation as well, we want to have a great grand opening ceremony, because this is a very unique site, and it'll be beneficial not just for our people, but for everyone else as well. So that's me, and this is my email, projectmanager@ikwc.org. And what is, and I'll just shut this out here and stop sharing, and then we can go into some questions. But what I want to say, just in closing with this presentation, that how important it is for us as Indigenous people now to see ourselves reflected through all these different areas of the city, and extending an open hand to other Edmontonians to come and sit with us and to learn. And so it's been a labor of love, and something that I know will benefit many generations to come. So thank you. I'll turn it over to Guy.
Okay, I'll take that as my cue, and we'll open the floor for questions. And please just raise your hand, or do the reaction symbol on the very bottom with a hand, or is it raise hand feature like that, and try and get my attention, and I'll ask you to speak. So who's got a question?
Len has a question. He says, what are the challenges, financial and other, moving forward? I think most of the most difficult challenges have been overcome in building the buildings and setting aside the land. It's taken 15 years to get to this point, but we were tenacious and we were patient. And the elders told us that when we start this, that we have to practice that, because the process is the product. And if we're talking about peace, friendship, and respect, we have to practice that in the way that we're we're doing, even though sometimes you can get really frustrated and not want to be peaceful and respectful. But nonetheless, we kept moving forward. The city has put up the financing for the buildings and the landscaping. So it's really, it's in the White Mud Nature Preserve. So the property or the land is owned by the city. But we are doing all the programming for it. And so financially, we're just putting together the financial structure for that. And that's taking a lot more work than I thought. But because it's so unique, there's a lot of different ways of seeking funding. And I know that there is a lot of support out there. So, you know, money is always an issue to run things, but I don't think it's the major issue. The challenge that I'll be facing is programming and organizing the various organizations that want to use this space. There's over 60 Indigenous organizations that serve Indigenous people, organizations, agencies, those sorts of things. And all of them have cultural programming. And so right now they have to leave Edmonton to go and do their ceremonies, but this way they can stay in the city, and they go many kilometers away to do some basic sort of stuff. You know, we're the only peoples that have to leave the city to do our ceremonies, which is unfortunate, but now that's all about to change.
Linda Duncan has something.
Louis, you are such an incredible human being. It's such a privilege to know you and to work with you. By the way, he also does incredible communications work, and he did the design for my book on safe drinking water. He's just an unbelievable man. Louis, I'll be talking with you again tonight with our River Valley group, but I'm wondering if you would be open to us sharing your overheads with Parks Canada as part of the work going forward for the National Urban Park. My question to you is, are you aware, are there any similar kinds of initiatives, perhaps on a smaller scale, happening along the river, possibly in Devon or in Fort Saskatchewan?
Nothing that I am aware of that's come to my attention anyway. So no, I couldn't answer that fully. Yeah.
And can you tell us if there's any progress on getting somebody's support for Cardinal's Arts and Cultural Center?
Well, you know, that's the conversation. And as you may or may not know, I did a presentation about 10 years ago to the then PC government, I think it was, and the city of Edmonton and federal representatives about that center. And they were very eager about it and very positive, but then the government changed shortly after that, and it kind of fell to the wayside. However, one thing I didn't announce, there's a few things, but one is, and a guy had mentioned it briefly, there's a project called Unceded, Voices from Turtle Island. It's 18 Indigenous architects from United States and Canada. And and the Unceded exhibit was opened in the 2018 Biennale in Architecture in Venice. And so now we're bringing it over here to Edmonton, and to have it run for about a year at the beautifully renovated Pendennis building on Jasper Avenue. And so that will be starting in the spring of 2023. And what we did with that is that we also, it's a legacy project. So what we want to do is leave behind Indigenous businesses as then Unceded moves to another city. And what we'll be leaving behind are three things. One is the Whiskey Jack Art House, which will be opened in the Pendennis building next year as well as an Indigenous restaurant. Edmonton's first, well, not first, but the only one so far today. And that'll be run by Chef Shane Chartrand. I don't know if you know him, but he's quite a fascinating chef. He's Cree from Enoch. And so we're going to have that open. And then also there's a touring company, a small one called Talking Rocks Touring. And it's an Indigenous owned touring company. So we're setting up with Keith Diakey, who owns it. So we'll be basing him in the Pendennis building, where he can do tours of the River Valley, talk about Indigenous history and geology history as well. And so that will be in the Pendennis building as well. So we're creating 3 new projects that will be contributing to tourism in Edmonton and really telling a different story of, or the story of Indigenous people from an Indigenous perspective. And yeah, so those are the 2 things that are coming our way. Oh, and also one more thing is that in February I sit on the Roxy board of directors, and we'll be opening the Lorne Cardinal Theatre in the newly built Roxy Theatre on 124th Street. And that's the first theatre named after an Indigenous actor in Alberta. And so we're really excited about opening that. And then the Nancy Power Theatre will be the main theatre in the Roxy. And so it's, good things are coming. And then the final thing is urban reserves. Discussions with the city have begun in creating an urban reserve that can help in economic development, employment, various things. So things are happening.
Louis, there's a couple of questions in the chat. Can you see and read them? One from Gladys Green and one from Jane Sampson.
Okay. Okay. Plant trees around main site, block traffic, interference. Yes, exactly. In our, we will be having trees planted along the fence of the Fort Edmonton horse pastures that are there. And so we do have that plan to plant trees. We also have a plan to plant Indigenous plants in the area as well. So we can have access to that too. So that is going underway. And it says, can you tell us about the Indigenous traditions, ceremonies concerning freshwater springs? I know there are some near the mouth of the White Mud, and wondered if they would eventually be a site of ceremony and teaching. The answer is yes. The elders are well aware of the ochre deposit that is there, and it's huge. I mean, it's been running for goodness how long, and the stream still comes out of the side of the riverbank, and it's really quite beautiful. And so the elders, we know that Indigenous people have been going there for a very long time and mining the ochre for use in ceremonies, and it's a very important thing. But White Mud itself, after what the creek is named, is also very sacred to ceremonies as well for many Indigenous nations. So there's significant site. That is a significant site. Indigenous elders recall their parents and grandparents talking about camping there as they would come into the newly formed city of Edmonton. So it has a lot of oral memory to the location as well. And a question from Gladys Green again. Hold Dream Speakers Fest with Canada-wide First Nations, how it was done downtown in the 90s. Yeah, well, hopefully, Dream Speakers is still running, and Sakemo, Christine Frederick is still running that. And I know they've been doing it online, but they certainly are looking at ramping that up. So that's all I can answer to that question.
Earl Sholden has his hand up for something.
Louis, 50 cars isn't a very big parking lot. Is it because you want to limit the size of events, or is that just a starter parking lot?
Well, yeah, we don't really want to encroach on the land with too much building. We will be having a fence built on the east side, and we can utilize some of the parking that's available at the White Mud Trailhead.
Oh, your voice faded off there. And Becky, is that good, Earl?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Becky has a question in the chat.
Okay, how damaged is that land from being a horse pasture, and how will it be made to return to be able to grow your garden? What's going to happen is that they're going to be leveling the ground in that area, and so that'll be brought up because right now it's classified as a flood zone. So we'll be building up the ground there, and we'll be bringing in topsoil as well to make it arable to grow things in. And right now it's just a lot of grass down there right now.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Louis. Thank you very much. Anyone else have a question? Got a couple minutes left.
One more.
Go ahead, Earl.
You mentioned urban reserves. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that might work?
Okay, so First Nations going through the legal process have brought the federal government to task for taking lands away from Indigenous nations without due process. And so through legal claims, which are called land claims, the courts have decided that yes, they are entitled to have reparations for those losses. And so they come, so what the government terms treaty land entitlement, that means they are able to have a certain amount of acres of land that they can claim. And so this First Nation or a First Nation or a collection of First Nations then can approach a city, negotiate an agreement for some land within the city, and then within that land base, relationships, business relationships can be, or partnerships can be created through the formation of companies for development. So in many ways, it becomes an economic hot zone, if you will, to develop projects and products for whatever market they want to go into. And there may be some residential parts of it. It all depends on what the agreement is laying out. I know that Saskatoon and Winnipeg have urban reserves, and so it's a mix of different things. So we'll just wait for more announcements as negotiations continue with the First Nations involved.
Karen Farkas has a question.
All right.
I don't really have a question. I have a comment. I am very impressed with the patience that has gone into. You say that's one of the 4 aspects, but I don't think I've ever seen that much patience on behalf of any group trying to work with government ever. So kudos for that. It's quite impressive.
Well, the teachings that the elders passed on to me is that we should not be thinking in 5-year business plans. We need to be thinking in generations. And so if our generations have to expend our patience so that our grandchildren and our children can benefit from these things, then it's well worth the wait and the effort.
And a question from Maureen about, are there any concerns about building on a floodplain?
Well, it's registered as I think it's a 1,000-year flood sort of thing. So there's a technicality down there or something to that effect. And because we'll be raising the turf a bit higher, then I think that we address that.
Good, thank you.
But the thing is, the flood, where the buildings are not going to be on the floodplain. The floodplain is the lower flat part where our sweat lodges and teepees will be. And the teepees will not be erected all the time. They'll be only put up when they're needed and taken down as soon as the event is complete. And so all of our impermanent structures can be replaced easily should there be a flood.
Thank you, Louis. And I think the sensitivity to flood damage has been heightened by the BC experience in the last few weeks.
Exactly, yes.
Any other comments or questions? Well, Louis, this has been lovely. And one of the things I forgot to mention is Louis has conducted River Valley Walks, where he explains the history of the Indigenous people coming to Edmonton. And those have been wonderful events. And I was on one of them, and they were highly acclaimed by the people. And I'm hoping that Louis will be available to do that again sometime when we can all get together.
Okay.
And thank you again for your talk today. That was very enlightening. It was way more expansive than I thought. It was going to be about just the Kichiaski project, but that was educational in so many ways. And I appreciate your involvement today and your support and your activities on the board. Thank you again, Louis.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just one more note to everyone. Anybody who wants a copy of this PowerPoint, send me an email and I'm happy to send you the link to a Google Drive where you can download it.
Let's see where's your email address here? Is there a way that you can put it in chat?
Yeah, hold on here. Okay, just 1 minute. Yeah, there it is. Project manager at ikwc.org.
Easy to memorize.
Yes.
And please, people, I've got to leave pretty soon, but please stick around and chat with one another if you so wish. I'll leave the Zoom open until people are gone.
Want to call attention to what Netta's holding up.
Oh, what's Netta holding up? Where is? Oh, yes. Netta, you've got something to say about calendars.
Yes, I have to do my job here. Almost everybody on this fantastic discussion here. Thank you so much, Louis. We're so delighted to have you on the board. Almost everybody of the 36 people on this call are members and know about the multi-faith calendar that we sell. But for those of you who don't, it's a Canadian product. Published in Vancouver, has all the major and minor holidays of 13 different faiths. It's a fabulous resource full of information and beautiful original Canadian artwork. And we sell it. So thank you, Mary McGuire. It is a beautiful calendar. And yes, so just I'll put our email address into the chat as well. Which thank you so much.
And I'd encourage you to not only buy one for yourself, but buy several and give them away to other important and influential people.
It's a beautiful gift. It makes an absolutely beautiful gift. Yes.
With all the discussion of holidays and the school calendar and all of the things that have been written, I've been finding myself writing back to people and saying, when they say it's too bad we don't have a source of all these, I said, just buy our calendar.
Yeah.
You'll
Yeah.
know when everything's happening.
Yeah, I did write to the head of the Edmonton Public School Trustees on Friday. I haven't heard back from her. Maybe I'll just mail her what I told her. But I mean, I know we understand the schools talk about their school calendar, not a literal calendar you hang on the wall. But I wanted her to know they wouldn't have to start from scratch. So I'll just mail her one, I think. Yeah.
It's a great source of information for political people, for instance, who want to honor or acknowledge various faith groups within their communities.
Exactly.
Yeah, I can only be on for another 5 minutes. I have another meeting at 1:30 I have to prepare for. So I'm open for questions or comments or ideas.
Thank you very much, Louis.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Louis.
Thank you.
As always, you're brilliant.
We'll see you all. Be safe, be well.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thanks all.